On a windy evening in Dallas, the streets were full of life, with pedestrians hurrying home, street vendors hawking their wares, and the occasional sound of passing cars. Among the crowd, a man sat on the corner of Main and Harwood. His clothes were worn, especially on the legs, and his shoes were nearly shredded. His name was Roy, though few cared to ask. Roy had been living on the streets for 3 years. Once a carpenter, he had lost everything after an accident at work. Without a job, insurance, or home, he struggled, especially during the holidays. Memories of his daughter's laughter and the smell of his wife's apple bread haunted him. But tonight, he was focused on his hunger and the few coins in his cup, enough to buy a sandwich, maybe. As he scanned the crowd, his eyes fell on a tall figure in a white t-shirt. She walked purposefully but unhurriedly. She wore sunglasses despite the dim light, and her hair framed her face in a way that seemed oddly familiar. Roy tried to place her, but hunger distracted him. "Ma'am," he called hoarsely, "can I have $1?" The woman stopped and turned to him. It was Melania Trump, and she was walking toward him. Roy's heart raced. People like her didn't usually stop for people like him. But there she was, just a few feet away, lowering her glasses to look him in the eye. "What's your name?" she asked softly, but with genuine curiosity. "Roy," he replied, straightening. "Just Roy." Melania stepped closer, looking him in the eye. "Roy," she repeated, as if testing the name. Then, to his astonishment, she held out her hand with a dollar bill. Before he could take it, she said, "If I give you this, will you tell me your story?" Roy hesitated. No one had ever asked him about his story. Most people tossed coins without a word, avoiding eye contact. But there was Melania, waiting patiently. He fought his pride and despair. "It's not much of a story," he muttered. "Just bad luck." Melania smiled gently. "Let me decide that." He told her about his wife who couldn't handle the stress and left him, about his daughter he hadn't seen in years. He spoke of the nights he spent packing up his few possessions so they wouldn't be stolen, and the mornings he woke up not knowing if he had the strength to carry on. Melania listened intently, without looking away. When he finished, Melania was sitting next to him. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked at the dollar in her hand and then back at him. "Roy, you deserve better than this," she said finally. She pulled something out of her purse that took his breath away, a check. "What are you doing?" he asked suspiciously. "I want to help you get back on your feet," she replied simply, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. She began writing something on the check, her pen moving with deliberate strokes. "Why me?" he asked. "You don't even know me." Melania paused, pen hovering over paper. "I don't need to know you to see that you've been through hard times. Sometimes life is about doing what we can for someone when we can. No questions asked, no conditions." The words hit him like a wave. His eyes filled with tears, something he hadn't done in years. He tried to speak, but no words came out. But just as hope began to shine in his heart, a voice from the crowd interrupted the moment. "Hey, is this some kind of publicity stunt?" a man shouted. Roy flinched, suddenly aware of the people around him, some with cell phones filming. Melania Trump giving checks to homeless people? Sounds too good to be true, the man continued, his voice thick with skepticism. Melania turned to face him. "If you think helping someone is a scam, maybe you should ask yourself why," she said firmly. The crowd murmured, divided between support and skepticism. Roy felt the weight of the eyes on him, and shame washed over him. "I don't want any trouble," he muttered, pulling his jacket tighter around his neck. "If it's going to cause a scene, I'll—" "No," Melania interrupted firmly. "Don't let anyone take this moment away from you. They don't know your story, Roy." The man in the leather jacket walked away. "Yeah, sure. Like you really care about his story. This is just for show." Melania stepped forward, her voice raised. "If helping someone gives others something to talk about, let them talk. But what have you done for someone today?" The man's face fell, and he walked away, muttering. The crowd began to disperse, though some were still filming. Roy stood frozen, his jacket tight to his chest. "Why did you do that?" he asked softly. Melania smiled softly. "Because no one should be ashamed of receiving help." Roy knew that this moment was far from over. He stared at the check, fearing that it would disappear at any moment. Around him, the city continued its frenetic pace, indifferent to the transformative moment taking place on the streets. Melania stood beside him, her presence calm and surreal. "What should I do now?" Roy finally asked, his voice mixed with hope and fear. "You start over," she replied. "But you don't have to do it alone." She pulled out her phone, punched in a few numbers, and showed him a contact. "This is Maria. She works with an organization that helps people rebuild. She'll meet with you tomorrow to talk about housing and employment. I'll cover the costs to get you started." Roy felt like it was too good to be true, but the sincerity in her voice made him believe it, if only for a moment. "Why would you do all this for a stranger?" he asked again, his voice barely above a whisper. Melania hesitated, her eyes filling with emotion. "Because I know what it's like to feel helpless. And because sometimes a single act of kindness can change everything." Roy looked at the check again, his hands shaking at the edges. He had no words to thank. Not yet. All he could do was cry, embarrassed by the enormity of what was before him. But as night fell, Roy could not predict the storm beyond the horizon. By the next morning, Roy's story was everywhere. Videos of his interaction with Melania Trump had gone viral, flooding social media and news outlets. Some called him a model of compassion, while others accused him of staging the encounter for publicity. Roy didn't care about any of that. He spent the night in a shelter Maria had set up for him, trying to process the storm his life had become. When he woke up, reporters were already outside, cameras and microphones ready to capture his every word. "Roy, is it true that Melania Trump gave you $10,000? Do you think she did it for attention? What are you going to do with the money?" The questions came fast, each one louder than the last. Roy's hands shook as he tried to walk past the cameras, head down. He didn't want this kind of attention. He just wanted to eat, sleep, and figure out how to rebuild his life. That afternoon, he met Maria at a quiet restaurant on the outskirts of Fort Worth. She was kind and patient, guiding him through housing and employment options. "Don't worry about the noise," she said, gesturing to the notifications on her phone. "It'll pass soon. Focus on what matters." "Your next step," Roy cried, but the anxiety remained. "I didn't ask for any of this," he admitted. "I just needed $1. Maria smiled gently. "Sometimes life gives us more than we expect. It's not about what you asked for, it's about what you do with it." That night, Roy sat alone in his small motel room, looking up at the sky. He thought about the last 3 years, the pain, the loneliness, the nights when he wondered if anyone would see him as more than a shadow on the street. And now, here he was, faced with something new. But as the cell phone next to his bed rang with another notification, Roy realized the hardest part was yet to come. The next few days were a whirlwind. Offers began to pour in, job opportunities, donations, even invitations to morning lectures. People from all over the country wanted to know more about Roy's story. Some saw him as an inspiration, while others labeled him as someone who had taken advantage of an inappropriate moment. The attention was overwhelming. Roy found himself questioning every decision, every word he said. But what weighed most were the offers that came with conditions, appearances in which he would have to publicly praise Melania, offers to sell his story to the highest bidder, even a proposal from a big brand that wanted to use him as the face of a campaign. On vacation, everything felt wrong. The check Melania had given him was enough to rebuild his life, but now it seemed everyone wanted a piece of it. He met with Maria again, her firm presence keeping him steady. "What do you think I should do?" he asked, his voice thick with uncertainty. Maria leaned back in her chair, placing her hands on its arms. "That's not for me to decide, Roy, but I will say this. Remember who you are and what matters to you. Don't let the noise bring that down." Her words stayed with him as he walked out of the restaurant. The next morning, Roy made his decision. He turned down speaking engagements, rejected brand deals, and chose instead to focus on the basics, finding a steady job and a place to call home. He wasn't interested in fame or fortune. He just wanted his life back. But as the media front began to fade, Roy discovered that real change doesn't come without challenges. With Maria's help, Roy found a small apartment on the outskirts of Arlington and began working as an assistant at a local construction company. The work was steady and honest, reminding him of the life he had known. He spent his nights organizing old storage, something he hadn't done in years, and even began volunteering at the shelter where he'd spent his first night. The city still remembered him. Every now and then, strangers would approach him on the street, asking if he was the guy from Melania's video. He would smile politely and keep walking, grateful that the attention had largely disappeared. One afternoon, as he was leaving work, he noticed a familiar face waiting outside the entrance. It was Melania. She was dressed simply, without the air of grandeur that usually surrounded her. For a moment, Roy was taken aback. "I came to see how you were doing," she said, smiling calmly. Roy hesitated, unsure of what to say. "I'm fine. Better than I was." "I'm glad to hear that," she replied. There was a pause, and then she added, "You've done well with the opportunity you've been given. Not everyone would do that." Roy cried, "I didn't do this alone." Melania's smile deepened. "No one does, but you made the decision to move on. That's what matters." As she prepared to leave, Roy shouted, "Why? Of all the people you could have helped, why me?" She looked back, her expression soft. "Because kindness needs no reason." And with that, she was gone, leaving Roy with a renewed sense of purpose. Roy's life wasn't perfect, but it was his again. He had a roof over his head, a job he was proud of, and a community that cared about him. Melania's check had been the catalyst, but the real change came from within. He had chosen to take this opportunity and do something meaningful with it. This story isn't just about Roy or Melania. It's about the power of a single act of kindness. It's about how a moment of compassion can ripple outward, creating opportunities for growth, connection, and understanding. Roy's journey reminds us that no matter how far someone has fallen, it's never too late to start over. So, what do you think? If you had the opportunity to change someone's life, even in a small way, would you take it? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that inspire and challenge you to see the world differently.